Welcome back, folks. We got the vintage cars on the track again. You're seeing some of these cars push start it. Now, when you think of the technology with racing, a lot of stuff was done for speed and safety. And some cars ran batteries back in the early days, but when they would start flipping, the batteries would bust open. The guys would get battery acid on them, cause a lot of severe burns. So some of these sprint cars and midgets, they did away with the starters to save a little weight. They did away with the clutches. There's no clutch in these cars. It's just a straight transmission, a straight drive line. And they also took the batteries out of cars. So you'll see them, though, what they do is they'll pull behind them, they'll drop them out of gear. Push truck will start pushing them, then they'll drop them in gear, turn the switch, and then they'll get the cars fired up that way. So it's just one of those little saving type devices for a little less weight in the car. That didn't really come about until about the late 50s when the money was starting to be paid for these guys to be paid some pretty good money to race at different tracks. Back in that day in the 50s and 60s, a lot of these guys would race 5 and 6 nights a week. And some tracks, including Jackson, Michigan, talk about some couple of gentlemen down there about Jackson Speedway. They would run them on, I believe, on a Tuesday. Different tracks would run on Wednesday, Thursday, all through the weekend. And some of these guys, that was their living racing. And a lot of these guys would end up racing Indianapolis 500s, like A.J. Foyt, Al Unser, Roger McCluskey, Gary Bentonhouse. All these guys would race throughout the Midwest 5-6 days a week to basically earn their trade. And once a car owner would see them do very well, then they would take them down to Indianapolis to let them race. So really neat deal racing back in the day with the open wheels. And
back when you used to have to earn your ride to Indianapolis 500.
Exactly. You don't have these guys buy a ride. You see them for a couple races, and then you don't see them around again after that. So a lot of history of this area. Gordon Johncock, a lot of folks remember that guy. He was out of Jackson, Michigan, raced super modifieds, Nolan. And Nolan lost his life there at Sandusky. Mentioned that earlier in the early 70s, late 60s. But, Gordon raced super modifieds even at the South Bend Motor Speedway up at Jackson, Kalamazoo. Ended up racing Indianapolis 500. I think it was 1982 won the 500. So,
and a lot of guys from the Michigan area. There's a family from Coldwater that goes down to the Indianapolis 500.
Brayton's.
They lost somebody not too long ago.
Scott Brayton lost his life there about 7 years ago. Had a bad accident on practice day. And Lee Brayton, we got pictures of him when he used to race. So it's kind of neat with some of these drivers back in the day when they raced modifieds at the dirt tracks. They actually would end up going to Indianapolis with 500 fame.
This is your wave lab, folks. Give them a big wave as they come by. These vintage race car drivers. Brian Roes, driver of the number 05 modified on regular race nights here at Springport Motor Speedway. He's wheeling that 25 vintage car. Herv Belliveau giving him a chance to try out a vintage car. Tim Beebe, green flag in hand. He's waving it, and we're going racing, folks.
You see that number 5 car out there on the track? That's actually a champ car. Those cars would run on half-mile and mile tracks for the USAC division. They still actually run that type of division. Those cars actually were legal to run the Indianapolis 500 for years, and you used to see a lot of roadsters that would race the Indianapolis 500. They would become later-day super modifieds at places like Sandusky in Oswego, New York, just the longer wheelbase. But those cars, once they got around and they're a proven winner, those cars actually did stick around for many years there. See that white car? It's got a red roll cage, red helmet. That's Randy Goodman out of Lansing, Michigan. That's like a mid-70s super modified that ran up at the South Bend Motor Speedway there.
I'm just blown away. I'm just so impressed by the look. My mind.
Oh, we got a spin out in turn 2. Jamie York out of Osceola.
I can't hardly get my mind around what it is that they're doing. It's just so incredible to me.
It's just neat, these cars. Some of these cars, these guys came to California to go get these cars, the East Coast. A lot of these cars are found in barns, in garages, rusted, and the motors froze up, crashed, and they just have a love for racing. And these guys, some of these cars were their heroes back in the day. And let's get a car, put it together. And boy, it's not so easy. You can't go to Lane Out Above and buy parts for these cars.
Absolutely, you got to be a true craftsman to put one of these cars back together. With if you're looking for a lower control arm for a 1953 super modified, you better have a machine shop and you better have a metal worker on call, because you're not going to just find it in the All-Star catalog and order it.
We had a guy with our car club, and he had a super modified. He was at Sandusky, and a right rear spring broke. He needed it. It came out of a 37 Chevy. Now, where are you going to find a 37 spring? So he had to replace the whole rear end just to get that straightened out. But it was like, how rare is that going to be?
It's virtually impossible. And the cars are so rare that there isn't even a market. You couldn't make these parts if you wanted to make these parts, because you may have the only one.
Exactly, like these Curtis Crafts. There's less than 200 of these in the country now. And that's like talking about that number 39 car that was out earlier and the 56 car. Those cars, when you look at the vintage magazines, there's $50,000 for one of those cars right now, $100,000, because they got the serial number on them, they're originals, and just beautiful cars. I mean, that's you think of a car 60, 75 years old, still actually in operating condition. It's just, it's hard to see a street car even in that type of condition.
And these cars are legendary. If you sit down and you go through the history books and you look at where some of these cars were from and where some of these cars have been, and you'll discover that, you take, for instance, that 61 Sprint car out there. It won the Florida 500 in 1979. That's a big race.
Yeah, Don Mack went down there. They used to have the little 500, and they did the Florida 500, and Don Mack took that car. He was a potato grower out of Minnesota, and won the race. Quite the deal there. And they say the Slago car, that's a sister car to the Gary and Butch Fidoa with the Dowker Roadsters, and boy, they had some major motors in those back in the day, and they were really a forerunner in the super modified world. And you got Johnny Logan's car in that 35. The guys out of Niles, Randy Peters, makes almost every show that we have. You can see how that motor's offset a little bit to the left. That started coming into play in about the early mid-60s, where guys were starting to do a little bit different. And I see them on those cars, the motors are in the straight up front, right in front of the driver, an inline car. Then they start putting the weight a little bit to the left side. They moved motors over. They started moving chassis, doing like now they call the offset chassis. Some of these guys have a 12-inch offset, 18-inch offset. Actually, the modern-day super modifieds are 24-inch offset. Kind of neat how the car is way over to the left side. Bunch of it, a lot of it's going to the right, just a couple bars, but yet the weight's still in the middle of the car.
You look at that blue and white number 5 car, that Champ car that's out there right now. We talked about that just for a second, but let's talk about some of the names that have sat in that seat and held that steering wheel. We're talking about guys named Bobby Unser, Johnny Parsons, Sam Sessions, Greg Weld, Larry Rice. Legendary racers have sat in that exact car and raced it.
It's like a Hall of Fame group right there.
That's a group of Hall of Famers, no doubt about it.
And those guys would race it on dirt, on DuQuoin. They would take it the next day, run Winchester Sunday afternoon, and then would take it the following week and run Salem, and then they go back and run the Illinois State Fairgrounds. And how those cars were, all they did was change them around. They put different tires on them, a couple of different springs. They were back racing again. Now, you really don't have cars go from dirt to pavement or pavement to dirt. It's just something unheard of.
They just adjust that nut behind the wheel a little bit, tighten the belts, and away they'd go racing. Head flagman Tim Beebe give them the one to go last time by. Green flag will be in the air as they come around. The number 35 car there on the lead.
Randy Peters.
Randy Peters, Michigan. From Niles, Michigan, bringing them down, and we're going to go back racing.
There goes the Dick Slago 92. He's got a little roadster tail in the back of that car. He kind of had it squared off there for a while. Then he went to Florida, and they called it not a real super modified. They wanted that roadster tail on it, so then he put a roadster tail on it, and I think he lost the other rear end for it, so he's got that roadster tail on it now. I think about the last 2 years now.
It looks sharp.
And you got your Dean Best car in the 29. Some folks remember Dean Best running the Trisac up at Angola there of Villa, Brain, Ohio. And then Dean unfortunately lost his life there a couple years ago, but Dan Klein bought that car, restored it, and it looks just like when Dean ran that car back in the mid-'70s. So you're going back, 35 years for a car like that.
One of my all-time favorite A.J. Voigt photos is him at Indy, having just won the first Indianapolis 500. I want to say it was like 62, 64, and he was driving a car that looked just like that number 5 car, only he had on a squirrel face on because his face was all black except where his goggles and his handkerchief was across his face, and the rest of it he was all raccoon face. It was just incredible.
And to think those cars ran 170 down the straightaway and they would blow a right rear tire, which was very possible in those types of races. Those guys could receive a broken arm within seconds because that rubber would smack them in the right arm. They'd have to keep the car under control, go over the wall. Those old videos, you see those cars going over the wall at Indianapolis, catching fire, flipping.
Those guys were the real, honest-to-God superheroes that drove those cars.
And like I say, the open-wheel cars are still around. You got the midgets coming up here in a couple weeks. You still got the out-of-value
not a couple weeks, 7 days.
7
days.
Next
Sunday night, July 1st. USAC Midgets right here, Springport Motor Speedway.
Then you still got the out-of-value Super Sprint Series and Hoosier Outlaw Sprint Series that runs the sprint cars. The Super Modifieds, you really don't see them much around anymore. They run at Sandusky.
Well, they got a show coming up. I don't like to promote everybody's tracks, but ISMA, International Super Modified Association, they have one show at Auto City and one show at Berlin later this year.
Actually, Sandusky, Berlin.
Sandusky, Berlin?
Must-See is going to be at Auto City,
okay.
August 24th. And that's a new startup group with the sprint cars and super modifieds.
Oh, right.
But Berlin, August 25th, and you can say the 24th will be at Sandusky. With the ISMA sanction, they'll have them at the Auto City Speedway with the Must-See Racing sanction. And some of you folks might see Must-See Racing on TV, a new sprint car series. BioBase has got a lot of money put into that series right now. And you got some guys like Jason Blunt out of Litchfield. Actually, he took that car down to Bristol, went 145 miles an hour.
It's absolutely amazing. And I tell you what, if you got $40,000 sitting in your pocket, just burning a hole in your pocket, and you'd like to see super modifieds right here at Springport Motor Speedway, bring your checkbook, come on up here to the tower, and we can get that deal done in about 10 seconds.
Well, this will be a beautiful track for super.
Wouldn't they love it here?
135, 140 down the straightaways.
Incredible. Just incredible. The sights and the sounds and the smells of these cars, mind-boggling.
Now you got some of these cars running alcohol, so some of your folks might have your eyes burning just a little bit with that wind coming over the track, but you know, a lot of cars ran methane and they say they're alcohol. Some guys are still running gasoline. Alcohol is actually a little bit of a cleaner burn, lower temperature. Motors last sometimes a little bit longer with alcohol. Sometimes those guys will stretch the motors out a little bit too with compression, but that was just the way racing was back in the day. Sometimes with these alcohol fires, though, you don't ever see the flame. Looks like
Tim Beebe's got the checkered flag in his hand.
He's
pointing at one. He's got the white flag for one guy, letting him know that there's one lap to go.
It looks like the Belliveau 25 car might be leading this three-car race right here.
Well, I'm guessing that 5 car is leading, and he's coming around on that 25. But I don't know that for a fact. You might be right.
He's kind of been poking. He's getting around pretty good.
Really? Yeah, he's getting the checker. Brian Roes driving the Herb Belliveau car, hand off the rough. He can't do that in his modified.
He's probably ready to jump out of there. He's thinking, oh, this is nuts right here.
Hey, let's go down and talk to him. How's that sound?
One of the owners of Top Notch Driving Academy right here in Eaton Rapids, regularly drives the black and red 05 modified. Eaton Rapids resident Brian Roes piloting this number 25B vintage sprint car, taking it over for Herb Belliveau. Ron Verrat is going to come down with me, and we're going to talk to Brian. Well, Brian, this feature win at Springport Motor Speedway comes in a 80 years old. I got to thank Hector Belliveau for letting me into his ride tonight. It was a last-minute thing, but boy, it sure was fun. Thanks, Hector. Hector drove this car last night out of, but after Hector's 78 years young, and after turning some laps up there at Spartan, he decided maybe I'd give one of these young guys an opportunity to drive an old car, and Brian picked a ride.
First time out here in actually a coupe. You know, it probably might be the first ever coupe winner out this track out here because the track was built in 98, 91. So it never really ever had a coupe race car out here. So this is kind of a pretty cool deal. Now, Brian, you won the race. Now, you went maybe about 100 miles an hour straight away. If these cars were about 130 for 50 laps, would you do it?
I would have gone 75 or 100 tonight. I hope my mod runs this good next Saturday.
Or maybe get Hector back over here with you, too.
Brian, can you imagine what it was like to drive one of these cars, 30 of these cars on the racetrack, door to door, tire to tire, on the dirt, 110 miles per hour. Can you just imagine what that's like? I tell you what, I wish it was me back in the day because them guys must have had a pile of fun. Woohoo! A lot of fun, and we're having a lot of fun right here tonight at Springport Motor Speedway. We want to thank all of the folks from the Vintage American Race Car Association, the Racing Association, the Michigan Vintage Race Cars, Car Extreme for coming out here tonight and making this show possible. Hopefully